My parents waited 11 months after I cut contact to open a credit card in my name, and the balance was $8,740 by the time a stranger called me about Tucson. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was making eggs. The woman on the other end asked me to confirm my date of birth, my current address, and whether I had recently applied for a $61,000 personal loan through a lender in Tucson, Arizona. I turned off the stove. I had never been to Tucson. I had never applied for $61,000 of anything. I was standing in my kitchen in Denver, Colorado, in the apartment I had spent 3 years making into something that finally felt like mine, and a stranger on the phone was asking me to confirm a loan application attached to my name that I had never touched. She asked again, patient and scripted. My hand found the counter. I told her no. That application was not mine. She paused. Keyboard sounds. Then she told me there were 3 inquiries on my credit file in the last 14 months. 3. And that one of them had already converted to an open account, a credit card with a $9,200 limit, opened 7 months ago. 7 months ago I had been celebrating my promotion. I had taken Della out to dinner. I had ordered a bottle of wine I could actually afford, and I had felt, for the first time in years, like I was standing on ground that would hold. The ground had not been holding. I had just not looked down. My parents are Lorraine and Gerald Whitfield. If you met them at a neighborhood barbecue, you would like them immediately. My mother has this laugh, the kind that makes you want to say something funny again just to hear it. My father shakes hands like he means it, looks you in the eye, remembers your name the second time he meets you. They are the kind of people strangers describe as salt of the earth. Genuine. Warm. They are also the reason I spent the first 6 years of my adult life digging out of debt I did not create. Growing up, money in our house was always almost there. My father worked in logistics, decent salary, stable enough on paper. My mother did bookkeeping for a local dentist 3 days a week. We were not poor. We were something more confusing than poor, comfortable on the surface with a current underneath that was always pulling. Vacations went on credit cards that came home and got shuffled into a drawer. School clothes showed up in bags from stores my mother charged to accounts I never saw statements for. Every few months the internet or the electricity would flicker off for a day or two, and my parents would explain it as a billing error, and by the time I was 14 I had stopped believing that explanation, but I had also stopped asking. The first time I found out what they had done, I was 23. A collections notice arrived at my apartment addressed to me for a balance of $3,800 on a retail card I had never applied for. I called the number on the back. The account had been opened 6 years earlier. I was 17 years old 6 years earlier. I was a junior in high school with a part-time job at a sandwich shop, saving money in a shoebox under my bed because I did not trust banks yet, and my parents had opened a credit account in my name and spent $3,800 on it and let it go to collections. My mother picked up the phone on the second ring. I heard her breathing change before I finished the first sentence. By the time I got to the part about the collections notice, she was already crying, that specific kind of crying she did where her voice stayed almost steady but her breath came in these small ragged pulls that made you feel like you were hurting her just by speaking. She told me it was a desperate time. She told me they had always planned to pay it back. She told me they loved me and they were so ashamed and they were going to make it right. My father got on the phone and told me I was the strongest person he knew and that he was proud of me and that they would fix it. I was 23 and I loved them and I let it go. I spent the next 3 years finding things. A store card. A cell phone line that had gone to collections before I knew it existed. A medical financing account opened in my name for a procedure neither of them would explain specifically. Each time there was a conversation. Each time my mother cried and my father talked about strength and love and making it right. Each time I filed disputes and cleaned up what I found and told myself that was the last one. The last one I found before I finally left was a personal loan for $11,000. I called home and my father answered, and before I could say anything he told me my mother was not feeling well. He said it the way he always said things he needed me to absorb before I could say anything difficult, leading with her health, her feelings, her fragility. I told him I had found the loan. There was a pause, long enough that I could hear the television in the background, some news channel with a murmuring anchor. He told me it had been a hard year. I drove to their house the next morning. I sat across from both of them at the kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast for 18 years and I told them I was done. No yelling. My hands were flat on the table and my voice was even, and I told them I could not keep doing this and I was cutting contact and I needed them to understand that I was not coming back from this one. My mother looked at her hands. My father looked at the wall just past my left ear. I drove back to Denver. I changed my phone number. I set credit monitoring alerts on every bureau. I spent 4 months disputing every account I could find. I rebuilt. I was 28 years old and I rebuilt from almost nothing, and by the time 3 years had passed, I had a 711 credit score and $7,000 in savings and a life that was quiet and deliberate and entirely mine. I let myself stop being vigilant. That is the part I have to be honest about, because it would be easier to frame what happened next as something they did to me entirely, and it was, but I also let my guard down. I stopped checking the monitoring app every week. I checked it monthly. Then I forgot a month and checked it 6 weeks later, and everything looked fine, and I told myself fine meant safe. Fine did not mean safe. Fine meant they had not triggered the alerts I had set up yet. The woman on the phone finished reading me the list of inquiries, and I was still standing in my kitchen with my hand on the counter and the eggs going cold in the pan. I asked her when the open account was opened. 7 months ago, she confirmed. 7 months. I had been building, saving, feeling steady. And 7 months ago, with a social security number they had memorized decades before I understood what one was, my parents had opened a credit card in my name with a $9,200 limit. I asked her the current balance. She told me $8,740. They had spent almost all of it. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. My legs just decided the floor was the right place, and I went with that. The monitoring app showed me the dates when I pulled it up. The first inquiry hit 11 months after I cut contact. 11 months. Long enough that I had stopped jumping every time my phone showed an unknown number. Long enough that I had started sleeping without that specific tightness in my chest that lived there the first year. They had waited until I exhaled. Then they had started again. The second inquiry came 4 months after the first. The card opened 2 months after that. The Tucson loan application, the one that had triggered this call, was the most recent, filed 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago I had been at the farmer's market buying tomatoes. I had been completely unaware that my name was attached to a loan application, a state I had visited once for a work conference. The card with the $8,740 balance had been opened using a P.O. box address in a town I had no connection to. They were smarter this time. The first round, years ago, they had used my childhood home address, the one on my old ID. That made disputes easier because the address mismatch was obvious. This time the address was clean and unfamiliar and designed to be harder to trace. My parents had practiced. They had gotten more careful. They had learned from the first time I caught them and applied those lessons to the second time. I pulled up my contacts. Found the entry I had labeled "Do Not Call" and read. The number I had kept but never used in 3 years because deleting it felt like something I was not ready to do, and keeping it felt like evidence of something I did not want to name. I stared at it. Then I closed my phone and picked up my coffee mug and put it in the sink and stood at the window looking at the street below. My friend Callum had asked me once, early in the estrangement, whether I was sure I was doing the right thing. Whether cutting off your parents entirely was really necessary. He had been gentle about it, genuinely asking, not pushing. I had told him yes. That some people you love from a distance because loving them up close costs you things you cannot afford to keep losing. He had nodded like he understood. I was not sure he did. Standing at that window, I thought about that conversation. I thought about the $8,740. I thought about the 11 months they had waited, patient and quiet, while I rebuilt something they had already decided they were going to dismantle again. I picked up my phone and called my friend Ren. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was steady and immediate when I finished explaining. "You're filing a report." It was not a question. I told her I did not know. That filing a report meant their names in a system. Meant detectives. Meant my mother crying to relatives I had carefully avoided for 3 years. Meant my father's wounded confusion being performed for anyone who would watch. Meant the whole family machine activating with me as the villain because I was the one who made noise. Ren was quiet for 3 seconds. "Marlena." A pause. "They opened a credit card in your name and spent $8,740 on it while you thought you were safe." I did not answer. "They already made you the villain," Ren continued. "The only question is whether you let them keep doing it." I stayed on the kitchen floor longer than I want to admit. There is a specific kind of grief that has no clean name, the grief of realizing the story you needed to believe was never true. I had needed to believe that cutting contact was enough. That removing myself from their lives would eventually make me stop being useful to them. That my absence would register as a loss significant enough to change something. The $8,740 balance was a 14-month answer to that question. I was not a daughter to them in any way that had ever protected me from being a resource. Those two things had existed simultaneously in this family for my entire life, and I had spent years trying to separate them, trying to find the version of my parents where the love was real and the theft was an aberration, a crisis response, a thing that could be fixed with enough time and enough apologies. I got up off the floor. I made fresh coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down every account I had ever found attached to my name without my consent, going back to the retail card from when I was 17. Dates. Amounts. Account numbers where I had them. I wrote their names at the top of the page. Gerald and Lorraine Whitfield. I looked at the list for a long time. Then I looked up the non-emergency line for Denver PD and the Financial Crimes Division for the state of Arizona, and I wrote both numbers on the legal pad beneath the list. I did not call that night. I needed to sit with it first. I needed to understand that what I was about to do could not be undone, and I was choosing it with full awareness. By midnight, the legal pad had 4 pages. My coffee had gone cold twice. The monitoring app was open on my phone, showing me the dates in a column: 11 months, 4 months, 2 months, 3 weeks, each one a measurement of how long they had watched and waited and calculated before moving again. They had done the math on me. They had decided I was worth the risk. They had decided, after 3 years of silence and rebuilt credit, and a life I thought was finally mine, that I was still the most reliable asset they had access to. I was 31 years old, and my parents had been running that calculation since I was 17. I closed the monitoring app. I set an alarm for 7 in the morning. I turned off the light. Tomorrow I was going to name them out loud to a stranger behind a desk. Tonight I needed 1 more hour of the life I had before the phone rang, the one where I thought the worst was already behind me. The officer who took my report had a name tag that read Okafor, and the kind of stillness that comes from having heard variations of this story enough times to stop being surprised by it. He did not react when I told him my parents had been opening accounts in my name. He asked me how far back the activity went. I placed the folder on the desk between us. 47 pages, organized by date, oldest account first. He looked at the top page. Then at me. Something moved behind his eyes, not pity exactly, more like the specific recognition of someone who understood what it had cost me to organize 47 pages instead of making a phone call home. The report took 2.5 hours. I gave him everything. Every account number. Every inquiry date. Both of their full legal names. Their last known addresses. The P.O. Box town. The Tucson lender. The name of the collections agency that had first called me at 23. I told him about the retail card opened when I was 17. He wrote down the date without looking up. Walking out of the station, the air was cold and sharp, and the sky was that particular Denver blue that looks painted on. I stood on the sidewalk and took 3 slow breaths and waited to feel something clarifying. What I felt instead was the specific exhaustion of having done a necessary thing that cost exactly as much as you knew it would. I called Ren from the parking lot. She picked up immediately. "It's done," I told her. She let out a breath. Long and slow. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The next 8 weeks were the most procedurally exhausting of my life. I disputed both fraudulent accounts with all 3 credit bureaus simultaneously. I contacted the Tucson lender directly and flagged the application as fraudulent before it moved forward in their system. I submitted a fraud affidavit to the card issuer, a 14-page document requiring notarization and 2 government-issued IDs and a written explanation of my relationship to the people who had opened it. The notary at the UPS store did not ask questions, but she did look at me for a beat too long when she read the affidavit header. I hired an attorney named Sandra Park who specialized in identity theft cases. My consultation cost $350 and lasted 90 minutes and confirmed that I had done everything correctly and that full resolution would take between 8 and 20 months. 8 to 20 months. To clean up what they had done in a single card application. My credit score dropped 38 points during the dispute process. I watched it fall every Sunday morning when I checked the app. I had started at 711. I watched it go to 701, then 689, then 673. I had been below 670 before, years ago, because of them, and sitting in my apartment watching the number fall while I was actively trying to fix their damage felt like a specific kind of cruelty the financial system had not designed anyone to be protected from. Sandra sent a letter to both of my parents' last known addresses. I did not read it before she sent it. I knew it referenced the open investigation and the legal exposure they were facing, and I knew that was the part that mattered. My mother called from an unknown number 4 days after the letter arrived. I saw the area code and watched it ring. She left a voicemail. The carrier transcription showed me the first line, her voice rendered into text, starting with my name. I deleted it. I blocked the number. My father did not call. I sat with that for 2 days, the fact of his silence, trying to understand what it meant. Whether he was letting my mother manage it because he always let her manage the emotional labor of situations he created. Whether he was simply waiting. Whether some part of him understood that there was nothing to say this time that would change the math. On the 3rd day I stopped trying to understand it and blocked his number too. My Aunt Beverly called 11 days after the report. Beverly is my mother's younger sister, and she has always operated as the family's designated messenger, the one sent in when the principals need someone else to make first contact. She called my cell number directly, which meant my mother had given it to her, which meant my mother had been holding that number for 3 years waiting for a moment to use it. Beverly did not open with a greeting. She told me that what I was doing was going to destroy our family. That my mother was not sleeping. That my father had not left the house in 2 weeks. That I had always been the difficult one and everyone had always made allowances for that, and this was beyond anything anyone had expected even from me. I let her finish completely. Then I told her the total dollar amount of fraudulent debt my parents had attached to my name across 14 years. I said the number slowly and clearly. Beverly went quiet. I told her that if she wanted to have a conversation about family and destruction, she should bring documentation of what she was prepared to discuss, because I had 47 pages organized by date and my attorney had a copy. She told me I was being cold. I hung up. She called back twice. I blocked her. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a list of every family member I thought might call next. I had 9 names. I blocked all 9 numbers before any of them called. It took 8 minutes. The thing that struck me doing it was not sadness exactly. It was the clean administrative simplicity of it. 9 names. 8 minutes. Done. I had spent years believing that family ties were complicated and required management and navigation and emotional labor. Blocking 9 numbers took 8 minutes, and after that my phone was quiet. The quiet was not comfortable. But it was honest. The credit card dispute resolved in 11 weeks. The account was removed from my report. My score moved up 9 points. Not recovered, but moving. The personal loan from before I cut contact, an older account I was still disputing from years earlier, resolved 3 weeks after that. Another 14 points back. The Tucson application was flagged as fraudulent and closed before it opened, which meant that one left no mark on my report at all. That was the one small piece of luck in the entire situation. By month 5, both active fraudulent accounts were cleared. My score sat at 694. 17 points below where I had started, after 5 months of Sunday morning monitoring, weekly attorney emails, 3 visits to the police station for follow-up documentation, 2 calls with the Arizona Financial Crimes Unit, and $1,100 in legal fees. 17 points and $1,100 to partially undo what they had built in a single card application. They had never repaid a cent. Not the retail card from when I was 17. Not the store card or the cell phone line or the medical financing. Not the $11,000 personal loan I found before I left. Not the $8,740 they spent on a card in my name while I was at the farmer's market buying tomatoes. Not a cent. Not once. Not ever. Sandra called me in month 6 with an update on the criminal investigation. She had that tone attorneys use when they are about to tell you something accurate that is also disappointing, professional and careful, and slightly too measured. She told me that prosecuting family-committed identity theft across 2 state jurisdictions required resources that law enforcement struggled to prioritize when the victim had already resolved the fraudulent accounts and the subjects were presenting themselves as elderly parents estranged from a difficult daughter who had misunderstood their intentions. I asked her to repeat the last part. She repeated it. My parents were characterizing what they had done as a misunderstanding. They had told investigators they believed they had my permission. That we had an arrangement. That I had agreed to let them use my credit during hard times and had then changed my mind and reframed it as fraud after a family falling out. I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. They had a story. Of course they had a story. Warren and Claudette, Lorraine and Gerald, parents like mine always have a story because the story is the mechanism. The crying, the shame, the apologies, the framing of their needs as your obligation to absorb, that was never separate from what they were doing financially. It was the same operation. The emotional management and the financial extraction were one system, running simultaneously, and the story was what kept the system protected. They had been running it for 14 years. They were not going to stop having a story because a detective asked them questions. Sandra told me the case was not closed. It was not moving. She told me to keep my credit locked. I locked all 3 bureaus. Hard freeze. PIN required to lift. The kind of lock you apply when you have accepted that the threat is permanent, and you are done pretending otherwise. That Sunday I sat with my coffee in the monitoring app, and I looked at the lock status on each bureau, and I thought about what it meant that this was now a permanent feature of my financial life. That every time I needed to apply for anything, an apartment, a car loan, a new credit card, I would have to go through the process of temporarily lifting a freeze because my parents knew my social security number and had proven they would use it. I would be doing this until one of us was dead. That is not a dramatic statement. That is just the arithmetic. Callum asked me to dinner in month 7. He was careful about it, the way he had always been careful with me, making sure I knew it was just dinner and not an ambush. He had been one of the 9 names I blocked initially, but I had unblocked him after a month when I accepted he had not called on my parents' behalf. He had just not known what to say. We sat at a restaurant we had been going to for years and he asked me how I was doing, and I told him honestly. He listened without interrupting, which was the right thing to do. When I finished, he looked at his water glass for a moment. Then he looked at me. Did you ever think about calling them? Before filing the report. Giving them a chance to explain. My fork went down on the plate. I told him that I had given them approximately 11 years of chances to explain. That the explanation was always the same shape and the shape never changed anything. That the report was not a decision I had made in anger. It was a decision I had made after sitting on my kitchen floor for 2 hours doing math on 14 years of evidence. He nodded slowly. He understood. Or he was trying to. I do not blame him for asking. He came from a family where parents were people you called when something went wrong. He did not have a reference point for parents who were the thing that went wrong. It is now 16 months since the Wednesday morning when I turned off my stove and a stranger asked me about Tucson. My credit score is 702. Still 9 points below where I started. The monitoring app is open every Sunday at 8 in the morning, coffee in hand, before anything else happens. The bureaus are frozen and will stay frozen. I have not spoken to my mother. I have not spoken to my father. I have not spoken to Beverly or any of the 9 names. I do not know where my parents are living. I do not know if they know where I am. My apartment still has the plants I have been keeping alive for 2 years, which feels like an accomplishment. Ren comes over on Thursdays. Callum and I still go to that restaurant. I got a small raise at work last month and I sat with the deposit notification for a long time before I moved the money into savings, just sitting there with the number on the screen, understanding that this one was actually mine. That feeling, the certainty that something is actually mine, is something I am still learning to trust. It takes longer than you think to stop waiting for the floor to shift. People hear about the estrangement and they want it to resolve into something. They want me to say I understand my parents better now. That I have found a way to hold complexity. That I have made peace with the fact that people who love you can also harm you and those two things can coexist. I have nothing that tidy to offer. What I have is this. My parents loved me and used me simultaneously for 14 years and called both things family. And I spent 14 years accepting that framing because I did not have a different word for what we were to each other. When the credit bureau called on a Wednesday morning and asked me about Tucson, I finally had a different word. The word was fraud. It had always been fraud. I just kept calling it family until I ran out of room to keep pretending the two things were different.